Time now for the Week 9 Over-Under Challenge. As always, this segment is presented by DraftKings. I'm Ryan Wormeli, joined by Colin Cowherd. We're talking through some of our favorite player picks for this week's slate. We will jump right in, but first I do want to remind everyone listening, you can play along with our Over-Under Challenge and try to not only beat Colin, but win some cool prizes as well by heading to fantasypros.com/challenge. Colin, let's start with the quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins going up against the Cowboys. Quarterback 16 in fantasy scoring on DraftKings this season. He does have multiple top 5 finishes so far. Obviously, that 500-yard game was a big one a couple of weeks ago. He's now facing this Cowboys pass defense, allowing 8.2 yards per attempt and likely no Micah Parsons in this one. What do you expect out of Cousins?
Well, he's made a lot of hay against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Carolina Panthers. They come off a very emotional game. I think there's going to be some points in this game. I rarely like the Dallas Cowboys. I like him in this spot because Atlanta generates no pass rush at all. But I think you have to be careful with Cousins. He does generate a lot. If you look at his games this year, a lot of his production is against Tampa and Carolina. I'm going to push back a little bit in this game. I think it's lower scoring than people think. I'll take Dallas to win.
Do you think maybe Bijan has a better game on the ground for the Falcons than Cousins does through the air?
I do. I like Bijan a lot. I think Kirk Cousins, because that offensive line is very good, has made Kyle Pitts better probably than he is. I think he's been a huge disappointment. Brock Bowers for the Raiders has been everything promised at tight end. Kyle Pitts has been a disappointment. I'll always take Bijan. Cowboys don't defend the run vigorously, so I think if there's a side to take, that's the side.
Another quarterback we wanted to hit on, Jalen Hurts going up against the Jags. He's quarterback 3 this season, 21.6 fantasy points per game on DraftKings, and really has been rounding into form lately in terms of his fantasy scoring. QB4 in week 7, QB1 in week 8 just last week, and now he's facing this Jags defense, allowing 8.1 yards per attempt, second worst in the NFL, just behind the Cowboys here. So what do you make of Hurts in this one?
Well, I think what the Eagles have done a nice job with is they've closed the boundaries on him. He's throwing less and running more. And they realize they're leaning into his strength. He is a hyper-athletic quarterback. Last week, I think he had 10 rushes. He's only throwing like 24 times a game. So I think what he's becoming is a more efficient version. I think sometimes off those Shane Steichen years, they would see him as a quarterback. They would just kind of let him do his thing. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. But I think when you close it in a little bit, create boundaries and say, we're throwing it 24 times, you're running it 10 to 12, he is more efficient. The turnovers come down. I like Jalen Hurts in this spot.
One of the other players in this week's challenge is actually Devontae Smith in this same game. So let's actually jump ahead to him while we're talking about the Eagles anyway. He's wide receiver 23, 9.4 fantasy points per game on DraftKings this season. Again, facing this Jags defense, 11.5 yards per catch. That's 26th in the NFL. So specifically for Devontae Smith, what do you see out of him this week?
Well, I like him, and I think A.J. Brown has such a relationship with Jalen Hurts, and I think you can see it on film. So I always feel like he's their number 2 pitch, and it just depends on the coverage. But I almost always like him in big spots, and I just don't think Jacksonville's very good defensively at all, so I would probably expect him to be productive.
Let's look at our running back here, Josh Jacobs against the Lions, RB16 on the season. He's run for 667 yards. That's 4th most in the NFL. Just hasn't had quite the pass catching or the touchdowns to score as many points. In fantasy, facing this Detroit rush defense, tied for 22nd in the NFL in yards per carry allowed. Obviously, the state of Jordan Love is going to be really important in this one, both in terms of the offensive efficiency for the Packers and also just in terms of the volume. We saw that week 2 game where Jacobs carried the ball 32 times when Malik Willis was starting. So, obviously, again, there's some gray area here until we know for certain on Love, trending like he's not going to play, at least from what we can tell. But what do you make out of Jacobs in this matchup?
Well, I think they don't know who's going to play, and so they have a very good pass-protecting offensive line, but they may not have their best passer. I think Green Bay's the side here just because Jared Goff's limping. They're on the road. Jared Goff's first outdoor game, and Matt LaFleur's an elite schemer. So I think Green Bay, even though a dog, I think they're the side here. My guess is they're going to try to control the line of scrimmage. That's the way to beat Detroit, is keep Detroit's offense off the field, keep that Lion O-line off the field. And I think the way to do that, especially if Malik Willis plays, is with the run game. So I expect there to be a real accentuation by Green Bay on rushing the football.
We usually talk about specific players in these segments, but just because you mentioned LaFleur and kind of the job he's done scheming, he's got to be up there for Coach of the Year so far, right? I mean, what he's done with Jordan Love missing games, on multiple different occasions now with multiple injuries. I every year I'm more and more impressed by Matt LaFleur.
Well, it also feels like his team. With Aaron Rodgers, you feel like you're complying with Aaron's needs and wants. I think once Aaron left, it is now Matt LaFleur's offense. And I think he likes the power run game. I think this organization drafts and develops at a very high clip. So I do feel like he has a real footprint on this offense, a real imprint. You can see it. And I think for years and years, we've just kind of given Favre and Aaron Rodgers too much credit. And I think LaFleur, to your point, is a top 5 coach.
Let's wrap up with a couple of receivers here. Malik Neighbors is on this week's challenge, going up against the Commanders for the second time. That pass defense is playing a bit better the last couple of weeks compared to how they did early. That week 2 game from Neighbors was quite a performance. 18 targets, and Jones only threw 28 passes in the game. 18 of them went to Malik Neighbors, 10 catches, 127 yards, and a touchdown in that week 2 matchup. He's wide receiver 8 in points per game on the season, by the way, Neighbors. Little lower since returning from the concussion, but obviously super talented. What do you think he does in this encore against Washington?
Well, I think without Andrew Thomas, I don't trust anything about the New York Giants offense, so I'd be a seller. But the Giants' defensive line is good enough that they get you off the field. I like Washington in this spot. It's a rivalry game. I think Washington, people view the Hail Mary as a miracle win. If you watch the game, Washington absolutely outproduced and outplayed the Bears. I think Washington win here is big, but I do think that's an advantage because New York will trail, and that means Neighbors will get a lot of looks in the second half. So if you have an offense and it has limitations like the Giants, but they trail late, watch Neighbors have big production.
Last receiver here, Puka Nacua, back in our lives after missing a large chunk early in the year, going up against Seattle. He was wide receiver 22 in that week 8 return from injury, had 11.1 fantasy points on DraftKings. He led the Rams in targets and had 106 receiving yards in that game. There was some question, going into the game about, limited snap count. What's he actually going to look like? And then he looked kind of like the alpha there. I mean, they really have 2 alphas when everybody's healthy. They're not facing the Seahawks pass defense, allowing 10.7 yards per catch. That's tied for 10th in the NFL. What do you think about Puka, in relation to Cooper Kupp or just him in general, if he's going to have a big game?
Well, I think he will. Offensive coach Sean McVay, extra time to prepare because they played on Thursday night. If you watch the Rams, Puka is their number 1. Cooper Kupp may be more expensive and more historically relevant. Puka's their 1. I think Kyren Williams and Puka Nacua are really their top 2 targets. Cooper Kupp has been slotted into 3rd because they can't really count on him to be available. So I think Puka, I love the Rams in this spot. I love when McVay and Stafford, like Andy Reid and Mahomes, get extra time to prepare off a Thursday night game. Love the Rams and love Puka here.
We'll wrap up there. Remember to head to fantasypros.com/challenge to play along all season long. Thanks a lot, Colin.